Okay, first of all, welcome everyone to Crimes of Form Design today, presented by Zuko and our special guest Craig Sullivan from Optimize or Die. The idea of today is that we shall Craig will be giving you the benefit of his years of experience in looking at bad forms, and then we will do a bit on our best tips on how to avoid those and how to improve your form conversion rates. So a little bit of housekeeping. You can drop questions anytime you think of them. We'll handle them all at the end, so we're not stop-starting. So we'll do a Q&A at the end, but if you think of something in halfway through, put a question in. So first up, who are we? So firstly, from Zuko, it's myself.
I'm so sorry. Microsoft PowerPoint has just decided to stop. It's okay. It's going to restart.
Well,
that's fine.
Joyce,
it didn't like our pictures.
Go back.
Like, who are these people?
Exactly the slide I was at. There we go. Okay.
Awesome.
So there's myself, Alan. For those who don't know me, I'm Managing Director at Zuko, and Lena, my colleague. So we're around today, able to answer questions even after this. There's our details there. If you have any questions, feel free to drop us an email at any time. But who are Zuko? For those of you who don't know, we are the artist formerly known as Formissimo. So we launched in 2014 as Formissimo, off the back of finding a lot of form frustration. So we developed a form analytics product to help people understand when, where, and why people were dropping out of their forms, so they could do something about it based on data. Zuko is the sort of second evolution of our platform. So essentially, we call ourselves Zuko to all intents and purposes now. So we're going to call ourselves Zuko. So that's us. I will now hand you over to Craig, who will start his bit, as I say, the crimes of form design. So over to you, Craig.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Alan. And so what is let me just turn off video here so you can see the full slides. So what is my dark and slightly threatening talk about today? Well, it's about all the crimes of form design, all the things that you can get wrong that are going to make people angry, make people abandon, harm your business, just generally upset people, right? This is going to cost money, and so they're crimes. I've been geeking out on forms since 1999. There are very few of us dotted around the world that specialize in forms, but I've also been experimenting with them since 2004. I help companies to unlock latent value that they had no idea that they had in the first place. But my forms journey starts in 1999 in the dot-com boom, when I was building all the early stage e-commerce websites for the John Lewis Partnership. And one of the fundamental things that I learned as soon as I started taking our designs into the usability lab is we didn't know what we were doing, right? Despite our best intentions, when exposed to users either in the lab or at scale on our websites, we were exposing fundamental problems. And that's when we realized you cannot build high converting forms without data and users, full stop, the end, right? I could end the deck right now. But what happened since 1999? Have we learned anything? Have we improved forms? Have they gotten substantially better in that time? And I would posit no. The design may have changed, it may look slicker, but the same problem is essentially gnawing away the worm at the heart of the apple. For we have replaced a lovely, smiling, helpful, approachable, friendly shop assistant here, like this young lady from the John Lewis Partnership, who give excellent customer service, and we have replaced it with a robotic, monotonous, unfeeling piece of software that doesn't care about you at all. What could possibly go wrong here, right? And it's still going wrong. It was a problem then. Squeezing all the humanity out of your interactions with customers by using web forms. And these are the crimes that I will cover, for these are the worst ones to commit. And the first one is to remember a form is not an interrogation. right? This isn't you putting a suspect under the spotlight and trying to extract data from them with pliers, right? It's a negotiation. Try walking up to somebody in the street and just randomly asking them for their phone number or email address. They'll look perplexed, right? Or they'll hurt you, right? It's not a good way of doing things. So it's a negotiation, and the psychology underpinning all of this is incredibly important. And that means the words are important too. Every little element contributes to this. And when you have on one side a bunch of guys who want clean data in their database and strict rules to enforce that, and then some customers who are trying to actually, get through a form, what you're doing is you're setting up an adversarial reaction. Your form becomes a battleground between the users and, your data gatekeepers, right? And that is the worst scenario to end up in. But how does this change perception? I once ran a 40-participant usability study, and all we changed between the two groups of 20 was the error messages. We made all the default unfriendly, horrible error messages really, really nice and happy and helpful. And we asked them at the end of the usability test, how well would you rate the easy use of this product, right? And the people who got the nice error messages rated it nearly 2 points higher, right? And that was the only difference at all. Yet they perceive it as being much more usable. The funniest thing of all is this kind of question in a usability test is actually useless, right? Because none of these people, none of the 40 participants were able to complete their task, right? But it did teach me one thing, that even changing the error messages can alter the perception of your product, right? So if you hire IT people, then you should hire a goddamn copywriter who knows how to write the copy for your forms. Here are some training resources, some free stuff to train your staff if you can't afford to hire one. Here are some excellent books to read that will help you write better copy for forms. And the economics are startling here, because bad copy on your site right now is costing you much more money than hiring a copywriter. And good copy earns tens or hundreds of times that sunk cost you put into it. So don't forget to design the UX writing layer in your product, right? There's a user experience to the copy. Make sure you pay attention. Next one is viewports. Why do people try and stuff all this thing into the viewport, This is why I clear cookies and look at the first time visits on the site. Look at IK here. Are you ready for spring? You are in control of your own cookies. That's not what I came here for. I came here for a freaking shop, right? Not for a cookie message that takes up 100% of the available viewport like it does on Zalando. But if you think about it, there is no one mobile viewport. There's a whole series that your visitors have, and your product experience is seen through that lens, and it changes considerably depending on the device mix. So whilst your site might look sort of okay on a Samsung S8, all those features and things are completely obscured by these overlays on a mass market iPhone 6S. You've just left a huge amount of money on the table, right? And the only difference between these is the dimension of the phone screen. But this also causes problems for forms, right? And these are the most common viewport issues, that you get tooltips or messages kind of off canvas. You have a chat overlay or some irritating other thing that follows you down the page and gets in the way. The field labels or the messages actually wrap badly. Or you get this thing where everyone sets the fields to be exactly the same size and to span the entire width of the freaking page, right? So you get this field that takes 200 characters for your name. It doesn't work. Other things such as error and feedback messages displaying off canvas. Yeah, you've shown them an error message, but it's 3 screens up, right? That does not help. But let's talk about Lego for forms. What are the atomic units that we want to build from? And this is the field level pattern. And you can go and steal this stuff, right? This is Nielsen's. Here's the gov.uk one. And here is my variant, which attempts to save a little bit of vertical space. And the gov.uk one and my one work really well. I know, I've tested them in the lab. and also at scale on websites. And there are also patterns included here for doing all of your error handling and making it nice and easy for people. And this stuff works, right? The best thing is you can steal it all off the internet. Buttons, email addresses, things to get dates off people, every single form element you want, right? This isn't the whole job, but it's part of it. So don't design a form from scratch. Don't copy stuff on other websites. You have no idea if they've screwed it up or not. Use some tried and tested patterns instead. The gov.uk stuff just works. It gives you a good baseline. It's just a leg up. It's not been contextualized for you. It's not the finished job, but it is a starting position that you can then optimize further from. Number 4 is device compatibility. And, you know, these are the foundations of high converting products. It actually works on the stuff that people rock up to your site with. It loads and runs quickly. People can read the text, that helps, and they can actually use it to do their jobs to be done, their tasks, their goals that they have in mind. And these have names: device compatibility, performance, accessibility, usability, and all the rest is completely easy stuff. You get these 4 right, you're rocking, absolutely. And I do all this modeling on sites to work out the device splits, and you know, I find some incredibly interesting things in there. But after doing a couple of hundred of these sort of data pools, I've figured out one thing, which is that for almost all of the sites that we work on, these are the top 4 to 6 devices that you can test your product with that will represent 80 to 95% of your audience. This is your minimum viable product testing list. You want a small iPhone, a small Android, a Mac laptop, a Windows laptop, and maybe a roughly 2-year-old iPad and Android if you have the traffic. But those will test your experience out in a way. It'll work on the larger screens. Trust me, if it works on the small iPhone, it'll work on the big one. That's not true the other way around. It's a very important piece of knowledge, that one. And all of this testing hardware, it'll cost you about £1,000 to buy. You can buy it secondhand. It's not expensive. You spend more than that on advertising online. So don't be a cheapskate. Buy the actual physical testing hardware for people. It's better than online services. You can use cross-browser testing and browser stack. They're both not bad. But if you want real mobile and tablet devices, here are 4 cloud services that have real devices plugged into the internet, and you can kind of remote control them and do things on there. A couple of articles there for you to read also in the deck. But if you don't have hardware, figure out which of your friends has one of those 4 to 6 devices that I listed there and make them test your stuff, right? And then when they get really angry at you calling them up, you can stop being a cheapskate and go and actually buy the hardware yourself. Not tested with real people, right? Sun Tzu said, no plan survives first contact with the enemy, and no form design survives first contact with users, right? It's not tested with real people, right? UX without the U is just guest designing. I hate all this fake stuff. I'm a UX designer, but we've never talked to any users. You know, you take the UX bit away. And my best ideas came from user testing. And a form is a doorway into your brand. It's a process, and people are the lens onto that entry point that you must interpret it through. So until you test stuff, you have no idea. So I've run tests where people said to me, oh, they should have an area where I can fill this in, these instructions that I want to give them, but they don't have that here. And you figure out, hey, we actually need to add some forms to our fields to our form, not take them away, right? You're not going to find that stuff out just by looking at the data. And there's some really great options here. There's online services. You can use new sort of virgin employees to your company, friends and family, as long as they're not in the content or kind of creative or design professions. But you should screen everybody that does tests, because there's a lot of serial testers going around and people with opinions in testing panels, so make sure you remove them. But if you want a cheaper option, hire an HCI student from your local university and ask them if they can do a project testing users on your website, and you'll be surprised. They'll love to help you. Number 6, nasty error handling, right? Errors make people angry, and they also anticipate the errors coming, which also raises cortisol levels, right? This makes people leave, right? The correlation between an error happening and people abandoning is huge. So if you fire one or more errors, then you've just massively increased the likelihood for people to abandon your forms process. So if you can avoid even showing any errors in the first place, please try. And don't show errors on submit at the end of the form, because that will hammer conversion. You need to use inline validation, and you can steal all that validation and error handling from gov.uk. Am I helpful with all these links of stuff that you can thief off the internet? But here's the evolution. The lowest converting is you throw the errors on submit. Better conversion is inline validation. But the best of all is inline validation and step-by-step feedback, right? So this is still in place in Autoglass like 9 or 10 years after I designed it, and that's because it works. You think telling me that I'm a good boy because I filled out my first name as patronizing, you haven't seen this run in a usability test. People love it. It completely assuages the anxiety that people have that error messages are going to come up when they hit the submit button. And if you feed them back at each individual step, by the time they reach the end of the form, they're skipping around. If you've never tested this out, you have no idea how happy it makes people, right? So think about it. Number 7, sucky password rules. This is from an Oracle HR system. It's probably designed to make sure that you can't log your sick days, because there's no way that you can remember your password. It's too complicated. But this is a recent invention, the maximum password limit. This is a new one on me. What the heck is going on here? It can only contain 12. What if my password's 13? But what if I use a password generator that does 24 character passwords, right? You need to make it 30. The other problem is that everybody seems to be under this misapprehension that password strength comes from complexity and not length, right? It's more complicated than that. It involves entropy. But over 20 years of effort, we've successfully trained everyone to use passwords that are really hard for humans to actually remember without writing them down, but super easy for computers to guess. How stupid is that, right? And so 4 really random common words are far more secure than Troubadour ampersand 3, right? It's a funny cartoon, but it's also mathematically true. It's about entropy, but it also costs you lots of money. People who can't log in ask for the reset password email, but it doesn't come till 20 minutes later, so they never buy the thing that they were going to buy from you. This costs huge amounts of money, right? Stop it. So don't impose constraints. You should just have an 8-9 minimum free format password. They can put in anything that they like, and they can have up to 30 characters. And believe me, that will make support for password handling and account stuff almost vanish overnight, right? You're just pushing the complexity in the faces of the users like a giant cactus stabbing into their eyes. Stop doing it. Autocorrect and keyboard hell, right? Someone once asked me, hey, Craig, on our form analytics, the most edited field is the customer name. Can you explain to us why customers are so stupid that they have to edit their name several times, right? People generally learn their name after about the age of 3. So what's going on here? Turns out they'd left autocorrect on, right? Which means if you've got a slightly non-white Anglo-Saxon Protestant name, it won't be in a dictionary, right? And you're basically going to get it corrected, and then you have to go and edit it. Baymard has tested here and found 80% of sites have this autocorrect problem lurking in their forms, right? It's really costly because it's really annoying. And I've made a list for you here. See all these fields on the left? These are all the fields where you will not find the input in any known dictionary on planet Earth or the universe, right? So do not have autocorrect turned on there because it's annoying. It kind of indirectly it discriminates against people, and it costs you money. you have 4 keyboard layouts on mobile that you can use for forms. So make sure that you use the right one for the right fields. A lot of companies don't. And again, this costs money in conversion, friction, frustration. Because do you think a 521% increase in the key hit area might make it easier for me to type my mobile number using my thumbs like I normally type? Okay, go figure. The best thing is all of this work is done for you. Every common field type that you would have in a form has its attributes listed in this cheat sheet. So you just need to go through your form and check each of the types of fields listed here has the right attributes, and the job is done. 2 or 3 hours work to fix max. Get rid of this problem. And if you want further reading, there's some explanation of all these kind of HTML attribute problems that are lurking inside mobile forms and nobody notices them. Heartless validation. Oh, how strict the rules are sometimes. But sometimes it gets even worse than this. Swedish Airlines popped up this nice little friendly message. Would you like us to pre-fill your passport information for you, Mr. Sullivan? I thought, oh, that's a nice message. So I clicked yes on the JavaScript pop-up, and it then populated this stuff in here. And it put the stars in there, right? And I thought, oh, that's clever. It's put the stars in so that, you know, no one can like see my passport number, right? But when I went to submit the form, it said, your passport number's invalid. And I was like, you bastards, you did this, right? It was you who filled it in, and now they're making me feel bad because they're giving me an error message. That's crazy. This one got me as well. Invalid phone number, only digits are allowed. What's wrong with that phone number? Only digits are allowed. So I like chopped at it and tried to work it out. I finally discovered it was the 0. 0 is not a digit. Oh, that's deep. That's really deep form stuff. Like users are just going to be completely blown away by that. This one's very common. I bet you have all had this at some point recently. It just crops up so much in our testing where you're filling something out and it gives you the error before you've finished. It's like, wait a minute, I haven't given you the year yet. What's wrong? And you're like typing in your card for the parking, right? And it's saying you must enter a security code. Well, give me a chance to type it then. Or wouldn't it be good to tell me my credit card number is not valid when I've actually put it in rather than the empty field? And this is premature error ejaculation, right? You're shooting the error too early, right? Timing is everything here. Number 10 is pants address lookup. Most high converting websites always have address lookup, right? It's simpler, easier, and faster for people to find their address, populate the fields, get your data quality up. And I've measured a 5 to 30% increase in conversion from using them. And the main problem is if you can't find your address here, you will not get the sale, right? So don't make it hard on people. Use services like these, UK, international, free services all covered there. Number 11, another big crime, breaking the browser back button. Criminal thing to do. It's always good to have a link in a process like your checkout, go back to previous step, but you must be able to use the browser back button. No exceptions, no ifs, no buts. And you must also be able to exit and re-enter the process, because when this stuff breaks, like 95, 98% of people abandon here, right? But they were high intent. You've lost people in the checkout. So test your checkouts forms and flows, check the exit, re-entry, go back, go forward, and make sure information isn't getting like nuked and wiped out when you're doing so. If you want a good example of a form that keeps all the information statefully across all of its checkout interactions, try AO.com. Absolutely brilliant. That's the way to do it. Confirm email and password. Who's still doing this? Come on. come on. Our email is something we all remember really easily, right? There's an incentive in most cases to type it in correctly. Even if people type it in wrongly, it's usually the domain suffix that they get wrong, right? So all you do is you show them a did you mean, right? You can help them correct the error, okay? And there's no need to ask for password twice either. Let me deconstruct it. Here's a single field password update form. You've got a password entry box, right? You've got the little I thing on the right, which exposes the password so you can see it when you're typing it on a mobile, which is useful. The I thing is not inside the box, so it won't interfere with password generators. And instead of imposing horrendous password rules, it tells you how strong it is. It's your choice whether to use that password or not. You just are merely advising them, yes, you did choose a good password, right? And those are the three things. There's a pattern, steal that. You don't need confirm password. Number 13, drop-downs totally suck, right? Because they hide information inside a menu. They're lousy on touch devices. They make it take a lot longer. It's more complicated for people to fill in information. And there are other controls that often work better. And date of birth is one of the worst, right? Because it takes me 16 taps, right, to scroll all the freaking way back down from today's date to when I was born because I'm so old. It's like age discrimination. The older I get, the more scrolling I have to do. It's pitiful. But this pattern below, right, this one from gov.uk here, it's 9 to 11 taps. It's faster and simpler. It's super mobile friendly. It's so easy to do it right like this. You don't need to do it that way. It's okay to use drop downs for sort or filter controls, but if you've got like 2 to 5 options, consider other alternatives here. So try and use another method for complex lists if you can. Those are buttons, toggles, radios, date pickers, steppers. Don't use them for date of birth, and don't use them where you have a limited number of options. You should really only use them when other options won't work, right? There is a use case here where the input isn't essential, like sort by price, sort by A to Z on a listings page, but that's okay because the input isn't essential to construct the page or get to the next step, right? So only use it where other options won't work or where you are incredibly short of space. Very important. Touch target issues. I remember looking at this site, and this is a mobile site. Look at the header here. This is not a desktop browser. And these touch targets were like charitably 2 to 3 millimeters, right? They're just impossible for people to actually tap on. And here's another one. I was thinking when I looked at this, oh, it's great. You can click on these color swatches here. Oh, I can look at the peach one and the blue one here and see it inside the page, except this is a mobile site, right? How are you going to tap on one of those tiny little color swatches with your giant meat puppet finger? It's not going to fly. It's not their fat fingers, it's your bloody website. Many people use their thumbs, not fingers. So tiny buttons are hard to tap. You should have a minimum size of 1 centimeter wide and tall, and you need to separate them. This McDonald's map sucks because the pins are too close together and it's too easy to tap the wrong one. Give them at least 16 pixels or 8 dp of space, and all of the information and research behind that is listed there, so you can check that out later on. This is another common problem, farting around with text in ways that makes it impossible for large sections of your audience to read it. And the first one is contrast, right? It's making, light text and light background, dark text on dark background. Might look cool, right? But people can't read the stuff. If you have much of an audience over 40, that means loads of corrective lenses are being worn, like contacts and glasses. So the contrast issues are merely magnified. Don't use it. Makes it hard for everyone and harder for older people. And especially don't put text on patterned backgrounds, like, hey, calling out ASOS here, right? Like, is this the pinnacle of your design? You spent money on putting this together. The only thing I can see is SOS here. That sums it up, right? For me, that's a perfect example. Don't put text on pattern backgrounds. You can use a contrast checker tool, and there's a couple of articles that explain here problems behind low contrast and text over images. Text is often hard to read on sites. You don't realize this, but your font is probably too small for people. You should be using 100% font size minimum for body copy on your website. Please do not use serif fonts for body copy. It's much harder to read, right? 100% is that default setting for fonts. You might be using a small font space, which means that you need to preferably increase that to 130 or 150%, especially if you have a lot of people over 40, right? Font makes a huge difference to reading speed and consumption. I know, I've A/B tested it. All the research is here behind the readability. Choose wisely and pick the right font for your body copy. Stop it, stop it, stop it with ghost buttons. Stop it right now. Stop making them, stop putting them on websites. They just do not work. Enough said. Ghost button gets 20% less clicks on an A/B test of over 10,000 visits to a homepage. If you want it to look cool, fine. If you want it to not get clicks, then design it as a ghost button. It's the same thing if you put wooden colored door handles on the doors around your house. You'll see how funny that is, right? That doesn't work so well. And go native, right? People don't wire into the native capabilities of the browser and devices. So when you're doing this, you need to make sure that all the autofill stuff works on the device or browser, that login, say on your phone or on your browser for remembering passwords or a password manager work. You've got GPS location. Make sure the phones are tappable on touch devices that actually have a phone inside them, and make sure that you can also take a photo of the credit card so you don't have to fill the long number out. It's boring, it's long. One-click native payments, right? Safari, Apple Pay is present for you, and also these other one-click take me away and pay for all solutions from Amazon, Google Pay, and PayPal, right? And you don't need to implement all of these to figure out which one's going to work for you. You can run research or do an A/B fake it before you make it test to work out which payment options people would actually choose if they were available. But you should only ever implement new payment types if the return on the payment type is actually greater than the operational costs and the fees involved in running that payment type, right? Don't do it if it's not profitable. But all these crimes have shown you are millions of hours of friction, hassle, stress hormones, missed appointments, bookings, lost sales. It just makes me really, really angry because all this money has been left on the table. And if you don't think you've got this stuff inside your own site, you definitely do. You just haven't looked yet, right? It makes me and my friend Michael very, very angry. It sets the flames of hell on fire for us because it's so avoidable. But why does it go wrong? And this one picture explains it all, because the form or the checkout process, it's the giant cube. Worship the cube, worship the cube, worship the cube, right? And people enter the cube. We know not what happens to them. Some may leave, and we know not what happens inside, right? It's a mystery to everyone, right? That's the fundamental problem for most companies. The cube just zaps tons of customers and they don't know why. And it's the fetishization of user-free design and experimentation, in my personal opinion. All this kind of fake stuff going around, but the giant black box thing just doesn't get optimized because no one looks inside. And you don't do usability testing, or you don't use quant and qual tools, and you don't test on devices and browsers, then it will remain a black box that's impenetrable to any analysis or optimization. So this is your 101 toolkit, right? Usability testing, test with real devices, set up your analytics data, get a form analytics tool like Zuko, get a session replay tool like Hotjar, implement polls and surveys, run contrast checking tools, use the Baymard cheat sheet, and implement those gov.uk patterns. And once you've done that, that's not the end, right? This is the start of a series of iterative and continuous improvement cycles. And you will eventually find after 5 or 6 of those that you really do have a high converting form, and that people will write into you and tell you how nice it was. It will be a shock to you, but it does happen if you do your job properly here. So what does 3% form conversion mean? It means, why the hell did you lose the 97%, right? And if you can answer all these questions, why did they leave? Where? What field was it? Is it something we said? Then you will get into an understanding of what's going on inside the black box. And today, and in the deck, you will find a link to the best book on form design that's ever been made, because there are 79 pages of advice in here, and it covers about 95% of the stuff that I've learned in the last 20 years. It's got checklists, it's got actionable stuff. If you want higher conversion, download it. Do all the things that I said today, but download that document for sure. And if you have any questions, please let me know. But Alan is now going to cover and show you some great examples of how you can open up the black box and find out what's happening inside and do really useful things with that to improve your conversion rate. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Craig. Can everyone see, can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
Real. Okay, so we've been through the crimes of form design with Craig. A very enjoyable session. This is essentially not the crimes, this is solving the crimes, so your form performs better. What we've done is pull together some of our most effective tips and techniques from across our years of optimizing forms. So as Craig said, we've got all our stuff, it's all in a book. So this today only scratches the surface. So feel free to visit our website, click on these links, download the ebook for free and have a browse. And I'm sure you'll find stuff in there that will help you improve your forms. But today, why are we here? Every form out there is different, and all you conversion rate optimization specialists will know and will tell us all that, while there are general tips and tricks, you need to be sure you need to test it on each form. However, we have over time found that there are certain things, certain tips and tricks that deliver form improvements more consistently. So on average, again, you do need to test these, but these are what we would say is a starting point for you. So we pulled together 6 of those in the time we've got available. But before we crack on into those, quick quiz for you. I'm going to, on the screen, you'll see 2 form versions back in the day when we were known as Formissimo. And we were testing, what would work best for our sign-up forms. So quick quiz, we'll give you the answer at the end. Put in the chat, which form do you think converted best and why? And bonus points for noting any other things we probably screwed up on back in the day, things that we've learned from since then. So please drop those in the chat and we'll have a look and see how many of you picked the version that performed the best in terms of conversions later on. So I'll just leave it on for a few more seconds so you can drop your A's and B's into the chat, and then we shall move on. Okay, so first up is inline validation. Now, Craig's talked a lot about validation, particularly inline validation, and I'm talking to you about it again. I make no apologies for that, because in terms of individual implementation techniques, inline validation is the one that we've seen consistently deliver improvements over time. As Craig said, inline validation is essentially where you're telling people that they're getting things correct as you go along. I've got an example on the left-hand side. Error messages aren't particularly helpful in that one, but it's still a reasonable example of using inline validation. How effective is it? The sort of best study I've seen was by Luke Wablinski. It's a classic study. I'll add actually the link to this presentation before we share it, because I really recommend you have a look at it. But that showed an increase of 22% in conversion rates. For our clients, we've seen improvements between 10 and 25% from implementing validation for forms that didn't previously have it. So we are confident of its effectiveness when done correctly. How do you do it correctly? Say many things that Craig's already touched on, but first thing is only trigger it when appropriate. We've all been on forms where you open up the form and you're met with a sea of red, you've got error messages before you've even started. That's a strong way to start the cortisol going. You need to validate at the right time, no PEE. Basically, the best time tends to be when someone has just moved on from a field, they've completed it, they've moved on to the next one, then you trigger the validation, is it correct, or is there an error message, so they can immediately go back. You need to position the message in the right place. We've seen forms which put all the error messages right at the very top of the screen, so you've got to scroll up to see what the heck is wrong. Put the message, as per Craig's templates, just below, perhaps just to the right, depending on your form. So it's easy and obvious what the issue is. And finally, keep green on the screen. Those big green ticks you saw, once they've done, keep them on there. We've seen forms where they disappear, they fade away, creates the uncertainty in the user and the stress. The benefits of having them is that nice little reassurance that they've got it all right. So once they've got the answer valid, keep it there. The next thing I'll talk about is less of an individual implementation tip, more a technique that you need to be doing, focusing on the submit button. So people who come, there's a whole cohort, I guarantee, who come to your site, fill your form in, take all the time to do it. They try to submit, but yet they still don't end up successfully becoming a customer. Why does that happen? Do you know why? These are sort of low-hanging fruit. It's money on the table. What are you doing about them? How do you know what is happening there? So you need to invest time and resource into finding out, because this is the quickest way to improve your conversion rate. So if you've got tracking that shows you error messages, that's a good start. You can also use tools. I'm going to show you one from Zuko, which basically is all about tracking what happens next, or in this case, what happens post the submit button. So someone pressing the submit button. So the way it works is, you can see on the left, it's a submit button. Where do they go next? And that's on the right. So obviously there's a big chunk that are abandoning anyway. They get so annoyed by the error messages, they just jump out. But from the tool, you can see, a number of fields that they're consistently going back to. So that indicates these are the fields people are having issues with. So in this case, the mobile phone and the password, not uncommon ones for people to have issues with. So this is a very quick way of identifying what the problems are, and finding out which fields you need to address. So, we do this a lot, and we identify issues sometimes just by using this, issues that seem to be causing 15% in drop in conversion. So it's a very quick way of finding out what your problem fields may be. The next technique is all around segmentation, sort of a bit more advanced technique. Often we look at form data in aggregate, but for the real powerful insights, often you need to dig deeper. So there's a number of ways you can do this. I'm going to point out a couple of ways for you. First one is to look at the difference in behavior with those who abandon your form and those who complete your form. So the graphs you can see here essentially are how long are people spending on your form, on the particular form. So if you look at the left-hand graph, it's split between abandoned sessions and completed sessions. And these are people who have started the form and then either abandoned or completed. So you can see on the left, people are taking about 3 minutes to complete. If they abandon, they're generally gone on average in 10 seconds. What does that tell you? Well, it tells you quite a lot, because it probably tells you that either you've got a really impenetrable form that people just can't face as soon as they start to interact with it, or perhaps you've got a traffic issue. You're driving the wrong sort of traffic to your form, and you need to do further segmentation, linked to something I'll take you through later, that to get to the bottom of that. Conversely, on the right-hand side, you've got a form where people who abandon are much more in line with those who complete in terms of time taken. And so what does that indicate? It indicates they're spending time in the form and they still can't complete it. So you've probably got a form issue there. There's an issue there. So you need to know why. In every case, you need to understand. You need to use form analytics to dig deeper, find out where they're dropping out, to identify where the problems may be. But splitting the abandoned and completed data is a starting point. Further to that, look at where the abandoned and completed data differs. This is important. So what we've got here is a form with fields on the left, and then data around what proportion of users had to return to the field to amend it. And it's split out by abandoned and completed sessions. Because in and of itself, the session return tells you something, people are going back, but does it mean that they're abandoning? You have a lot of forms, for example, education forms with long form content that people are constantly dropping back in to amend their answer. So it doesn't necessarily follow that it's causing abandonment. Where you see a difference, that's where you've got to be worried. So in this case, I've highlighted address. So you can see in 22% of abandoned sessions, people are going back to the address, and it's only in 14% of completed sessions. So that's a red flag. In this particular case, it was to do with usability, and that is often the case. You can see there's a usability issue, perhaps due to the validation around postal code or address or something like that. So this again flags that you need to look at these fields. The second segmentation area to be aware of is traffic source. We know that different traffic sources behave very differently within forms. So you need to break that down. So if you look at this graph, I'd like you to look at the red line on the graph, which is a starter to completion rate. And you can see that drops significantly around August time. So normally, if you were just looking at this in isolation, you say, oh, what's going on with the form? Something's wrong. We need it to be broken. You know, what's going on? But actually, what is happening is if you break this down via organic traffic and paid traffic, you can see what's going on. So if you look on the left-hand side, we have organic traffic, and you can see the red line there, that actually it's fairly steady. There's a slight dip, but it's not as steep as the graph would indicate to say that actually these guys are behaving pretty similar to the way they've always behaved. Whereas if you look on the right, if you ignore the sort of ziggy-zaggy blue stuff on the left, that's sort of from some random paid traffic that's made its way through to the form before August, you can see they basically started a paid for campaign in August. And so you can see the red line there is around the 40% mark, which is much lower than they started to than the organic traffic. So what's happening is not something to do with the form, it's to do with the traffic. And so obviously, again, you would dig down deeper here. You know, in extreme cases, we've had an insurance client who improved the conversion of their paid traffic by 41% purely by creating a dedicated form landing page. They noticed the different behavior with the different segments. They saw that the paid traffic were dropping off when they were asking him sensitive personal information early on. So they redesigned the form to put that information later on once they'd got them in, and they improved the conversion significantly off the back of that. So you need to break this down between your audiences. Next piece of advice is around when you're testing your form. We often test our forms with people who know the form and they know what to do, know what to expect. You need to test your form with people that basically will break it. You may think it's obvious to the users what they should be doing, but believe me, there will be people out there doing things that you don't expect. So what do? You need to test it, doing things that the form isn't necessarily designed to do. Some tips on the right, and there's much more in the book. Submit the form blank, see what happens. Miss out certain fields. What error message do you get? Go back and forth between different stages. Use the back button and as well as the inbuilt buttons. Is the data there? Does it get nuked? Leave the form for 20 minutes. Does it die? Or keep the user engaged? If you've got a numeric field, enter letters into it, and vice versa for letter fields. Misformat anything you can, emails, phone numbers, credit cards, and disregard any guidance that they give you for password. What happens? Does the form break? What do the error messages say? Are those error messages helpful? Important. So the most important thing is to see what the error messages are triggered. We see consistently 5 to 10% improvement just by making error messages more helpful. And so this is one of the things you need to look at. What are you telling customers when things go wrong? Explain why. You know, why do you need the information from customers? So the Baymard Institute, which Craig's talked about before, is has shown in their studies that if lack of explanation is directly related to dropout, there's a quote on the left-hand side there. Why do you need someone's phone number? If you're ordering from an e-commerce site, you give them your email address, you give them your physical address to deliver. Why do you need the phone number? You know, if you do need it, make sure you tell them why. There's a good example on the right there, which tells people why. Why do you, what are you going to do with it? And if you don't put those sort of messages in, there's always a suspicion, am I going to get spammed? You know, you need to reassure people when you can. And this manifests itself in abandonment rates. You know, we see it in significant dropouts on email and phone fields in particular. Just an example of here how the data may be manifested in Zuko in terms of abandonments. You know, we've seen 14% improvement just by removing a phone number field that was not necessary. We've seen improvements of 5 to 10% on a single field just by adding a reason. So be clear why you need information. The final point, which Craig's talked about as well, is testing and refining. So on that note, which do we think won here? I'm not looked at the chat. Lena, can you tell me, is it A's or B's, and are there any reasons?
There are majority of B's that I guess. There's a couple of A's thrown in as well, but most people are guessing B's, and they are saying things like there is no confirmed password field in the B.
Mm-hmm.
They are also saying the register button is clearer in the B, and that the copy is better in the B. Those are kind of the main points.
Right. Okay. Well, that's correct. Yes, we had 53% more conversions for the B. Now, we did mess up here. One thing is we were using a drop down in both of these, which, as Craig says, is suboptimal to say the least. We've learned from that. We also tested numerous things at the same time. So as well as confirm password, we changed the register button. We changed, you know, whether there was a number in the top left-hand corner. Ideally, we shouldn't have done that. So we can't be 100% certain for the reasons. We strongly suspect it's confirmed password based on other tests that have been done elsewhere. So as Craig says, don't confirm password. You can see the results here. So how do you test and refine? Do it better than we did in this case, one variable at a time so you can be certain on results. Integrate with a testing tool. There's a lot of good ones out there. Optimizely, Convert.com, Google Optimize. Zuko has integrations with all of these, so you can then also, if you want to use Zuko as a form analytics tool, you can push variants into Zuko and see what variant A versus variant B did. And you need to iterate continuous improvement over time. It's not just a one-off. Some of the things you might want to test in your forms, a call to action at the top and the bottom, change that, see what happens. Change your copy, the instructions and your error messages, change that, does it improve things? Remove non-essential fields like the phone number we talked about before. In terms of the formatting, the form length, do you want to chunk your information together? Do you want to put it on a single page? Do you want to do a multi-page form? Test validation methods, inline validation, and the messages you give people. Check if save buttons makes a difference, or if how you allow people to pay and how the integration works and how you communicate that. Those are just all starting points for you to start testing forms. So that's essentially our top 6 bits. You can find more in the book. Say it wouldn't be a webinar without one shameless plug. If you think that data can help you improve your form conversion, Zuko offers free, no strings attached trials. Take a look on our website if you want to try us out and see what the data shows for you. And so that's all for now. Let's move on to any questions.
I see 2.
Yes, there's 2 that's come through already.
Okay.
Paul's one I can't answer because Abby probably knows the answer to this. She has a whole range of tools that she uses for doing accessibility audits. So sadly, I could attempt to answer that, but it would be a rubbish answer and it probably wouldn't be true. And Abby's laughing right now. But the other question here is a very good one. Which is better, spending a week auditing and fixing your forms, or spending a month designing, planning, and implementing an A/B test? And stone cold, it is having a better baseline, right? So running usability testing, doing an audit, using some of the tools that we've talked about here today to get a good baseline is where you experiment from. The problem is running experiments on a suboptimal product means that the experiment has essentially got additional noise in it, right? That's one problem. The second problem is you're kind of trying to polish, the proverbial, right? You're trying to run experiments to find out things on a product that should just have a whole load of stuff fixed. You need to find what that is and fix it, get a solid baseline, and then use those tools iteratively, right? And if you're using the tools, what will happen is you'll get really great ideas to form hypotheses to run A/B tests, right? Because it will be through observing what people are doing where they're dropping out. You'll begin to think, oh, it'd be good if we ran a test on that. So I don't tend to do atomic things in A/B tests unless it's, say, something like an address finder that we're just changing that one particular part. It tends to be more overarching things like testing funnels or testing numbers of steps in funnels or radically different designs. Please do the baselining first, because running experiments on top without knowing what those are is pretty futile.
We have a question from Levi. What would you suggest using instead of a drop down for selecting company state?
This is a good...
Yeah, it's a good question. I've got my preference. Do you want to go first?
It's a good one. There is actually a pattern that you can use for this, which is a combo drop down and entry box. So it's an entry box that also has a drop down bit on the right, and you can actually type text into it. So if you really want to send your shipment to Angola, then you can start typing ANG in there and it will find Angola in the list and you can pick it. You can also use it as a standard traditional drop down control as well by clicking on the little drop downy bit on the right hand side. Another way of mitigating this problem is to strip out all of the countries that you don't actually ship to, right? If you're a cinema in North London, right, you're not going, no one's coming from Angola for a cinema ticket tonight, right? You probably don't need that country in there. And the third mitigation strategy is to take your most popular country selections and put those in a mini list at the top if you have to have a drop down, right? So all you're doing is mitigation strategies to reduce the amount of work it takes for someone to tell you their country. And the last tip would be that you have a smart default there. If you've got GeoIP, or if you've got some reasonable assumption because of the page someone's landed on, the route they've taken, about which country that they're coming from, don't ask them to tell you. We have like computers and technology to do GeoIP. So you can use smart defaults to even help you there. And then they don't need to touch the field at all in the first place. Yay!
Yeah, bang on. I'd agree with that, Craig. The next one is, what is your experience in breaking up longer forms in more steps, one page or two?
This is always a good one because it's not necessarily true that shorter is better. I think it's all about the psychology of the chunking for users. And there's two kinds of chunking. There's page level chunking, where it's the number of steps you're breaking it up into. And you've got extremes like the gov.uk site in UK, which will do like one question at a time. What's your date of birth? Next, what's your driving license number? Next. That works fine for them, but it won't it's not going to work in an e-commerce site with like 37 pieces of information to collect. So it's about the information chunking within each page, so how things are clustered together and grouped so you can feel that you're making progress through them, but it's also about how they're then distributed over a number of pages. I once ran a 3-step, 5-step, 7-step, 9-step, and 11-step checkout test, right? God knows why I designed something so infernally complicated, but I was able to find out the sweet spot, and it was not the shorter amount of steps, right? It was bang in the middle. So it's about how you feed out the chunks of information in portions that are not overwhelming. A great example of this is if you use session replay tools, pull out all the recordings for, if you've got a really long form on a page, or you think there's too much information on one page, what you'll see is loads of recordings where people come to the page, scroll down, scroll back up, scroll down, scroll back up, and then bugger off and leave the form forever. what are they doing? They're evaluating the work involved in the page that you design that you've just thrown at them. You said, this is your chunk of work. If it looks too overwhelming, then you need to cut it down. So you need to either distribute it over more steps, or you need to break it up internally within the page. And another good way of doing that, instead of the chunking, is to do progressive disclosure. So you kind of do one section at a time. We've done your vehicle bit, right? Let's move on to the next section, right? And so you're doing steps inside a page, So it's all about loading and chunking, this one.
Great. So some that have come through in the chat, will this webinar be available to rewatch? Yes, so we'll share those via email to everyone. Next one is a form-based. What if we need personal information and we are seeing abandons on those fields where the personal information is requested, example, name, phone, address? How do we get to the hypothesis and make it better? So I guess that's a question around personal information and people dropping out when being asked it.
Yeah, I think this one's, in some ways, this is such an obvious one, because it comes down to, there are other research methods for potentially finding out precisely what the reasons for abandoning on that field are. But, it doesn't take a genius on some of this stuff to work out. It's all about the negotiation, right? And what's in it for me. And that balance is more than just the fields. It's also about their motivation level to complete the form, right? Is it a free product? Is it really expensive? That completely changes their motivation to get through it, right? But the thing that Alan mentioned is the most important thing. You have to tell them why, right? If you tell them why you need the information, then people are totally cool with it, right? It's amazing. If you need to get into the photocopier or something, or get it in the head of a queue sometime, just tell them your car's on a meter, right? And the time's running out, you've only got 5 minutes left, and they'll let you into the queue. It's because you told them why. You gave them a reason to allow themselves to let you into the queue, right? So again, it's back to that negotiation, and it's a trade here. You're trading off the amount of it, the amount and depth and quality of information that you can glean on customers versus what they want to give you. And if you get that balance wrong and you ask for too much, and finding out where the sweet spot is, you will gain through form analytics tools, user research, and data. There's a GDPR one here. Shall I answer that one?
Sure.
If you're asking people to opt in or make some commitment to anything, then it's a trade, right? The biggest thing I see with stuff like, hey, sign up for our newsletter. We're not going to tell you anything about it, but trust us, it's really great, right? Running A/B tests there to actually show them an example, an overlay example, or here's last month's, right? Or check out what was in last month's issue, right? So what you're doing is you're actually saying, we would like your information or your opt-in in exchange for this thing, which we have not tangibly explained to you whatsoever, right? So actually show what it is. If you cannot communicate the value of something you require an opt-in for, then people will not opt in. So figure out how to communicate the value. If there is no value, then you have no chance, right? You may as well take it off and improve your form conversion. But if there is value there, just sell it a bit better. Show them an example of what they're going to get in the future if they make the commitment, right? Because it's not about ticking the box, it's about what I get.
Yeah.
What's my opinion on the standard Shopify checkout form?
We got all afternoon then.
That Shopify have done very little to optimize that. My personal opinion is, if I was working at Shopify on product, I would be using that checkout as a quant research tool at scale to make the checkout continually better. And I've not seen very much evidence of anything fundamentally changing over the last couple of years. Someone from Shopify will probably challenge me on that, but but I don't see it's very different, and it's not optimal either, right? It's held up as some optimal standard, but it fails a lot of the things that Alan and I have talked about today. And also people can implement it badly as well, or leave things out. So it's okay, it's not bad, but it does require further optimization, right? And I wish that Shopify were on a continual improvement gig with that core checkout, because they could raise the sales of every single company that's on their platform by investing in the stuff that we've talked about today to make it better for everyone. Amen.
Amen. I think there's one more, if you're okay. Alex has asked, what are your thoughts on chatbot style forms?
On checkbox style forms.
Chatbot.
Oh, chatbot style forms. Oh yes, another example where we thought we'd be clever and we've managed to strip out all the humanity. I have a great example of where I had a 7-minute conversation with a NatWest chatbot, right? Where all I wanted to do was figure out where to get my business balance from, the balance of my business account, right? And it couldn't handle it, right? I think, rather than thinking just about chatbots, people think about chatbots, oh, it's contact deflection. It's a good way of, we'll sort of put it between us and the customer, right? And it will kind of fend them off, right? Actually, you want to bring them in and invite them in, right? You really want to be deep into that kind of connection of what's happening. And what you really need to do is be understanding how to manage contact deflection by making sure the problems never happen in the first place, or that the customer can self-service their own solution. Chatbots are not good enough to do that right now, unless the chatbot's wired up to, do all the things and handle all the things that a normal form would. I just don't think it's there yet. And I personally would find it quite irritating, because I tend to kind of rattle through forms fairly quickly. I don't know, it depends on the context. If you look at the gov.uk digital services, theirs are based on that kind of question and answer kind of format. So who knows, it may work differently. I certainly don't think it's going to work in an e-com situation, but there may be contexts in which it's great.
Great. Well, I think that's it for the questions. So
thank you. Great questions.
I think we shall wrap that up there then. We've gone slightly over time. So thank you everyone for attending. We'll be sending you emails with links to the videos and the decks involved. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them to any of us at any point.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.